Hello and welcome to Stork'd, the podcast in which we explore the many ways people build and define family. I'm Julia Karol, the host, and this is the first episode of Season 2. I am really excited to introduce Season 2, and what I'd like to do with this episode is introduce anybody who's new to Stork'd about what the podcast is and why it was created, who I am, and then give everyone a little update in my journey, which has had a bit of a twist ending, or I guess a twist beginning, we should say. And then tell everyone a little bit about what I expect and hope for this season. Thank you guys so much for listening. As a reminder for anyone who hasn't joined us in the past or for whom it's been a while, Stork'd was created by myself with some help from a lot of resources and friends, etc., in an effort to document the exploration that I was doing in my own journey to become a parent. And so what happened really was, and this is just a quick reminder, I was 38, it was the spring of 2020, the pandemic was raging, and I was starting to think about how I wanted to live the next years of my life. I've been wanting to be a parent for some time now, and for various reasons, it just wasn't happening in the traditional way. And by traditional, I mean you find somebody, you fall in love, you get married, you decide to have a family together, everything works naturally, and boom, 2.5 kids later. And that white picket fence American dream just wasn't happening for me. And as I was exploring all of these options and really trying to think about what this could be for me and what I wanted, I got to have some really incredible conversations with really remarkable people who have been on their own journeys, some traditional, some non-traditional. And so I decided to record all of that, and that is what this podcast is all about. It's the voices of people who have had the moment where they have to sit and reflect on who is my family, and how do I want to build family and community for myself, and what does my life look like in the context of this family building. There's a quote I want to share with you, which has been really meaningful to me. And of course, it's from the amazing Dolly Parton. I am a Northeast girl, and yet I do love my country music. And so Dolly Parton says, "Find out who you are and do it on purpose." And I just love this quote. As it turns out, in building this podcast and in trying to create my family life, I've really been able to answer that question for myself. And so I think at the heart of the question of what is family, there's this really important question of who am I in the context of how do I define family? How do I define my values? How do I define what is important to me? And I hope that as you're listening to other voices and different episodes and the next season, you hear that a little bit. You hear that, who are you and what are you doing on purpose? Because family building can be very purposeful. There's another quote I want to give you, and this is from one of my best friends, and that is, live life for the story value. And that was when our 20s hit and we had a little bit of disposable income, not much, but we were out of college. And before having significant responsibilities, home ownership and kids or partners or however you want to define responsibility, we used to joke that if you live life by the story value, you'll always have fun. And we did. We had a lot of fun in our 20s. But that quote, too, is starting to shift and change meaning for me in that our stories have so much value. And so what I hope you'll hear in this season is stories that have something meaningful to share. You'll notice that not every story resonates with you. You may not agree with any story. Certainly, I'm trying to let every voice speak for itself. And what that means is that these are people's stories and they're meaningful, and that there are decisions and thoughts and values and experiences that were true for that person. And I personally have gotten so much out of every single conversation. I hope you listen to every episode. I hope you learn from every episode. That is my wish for this podcast. So let me tell you a little bit about my story. Where we left off is that as I was having these conversations and publishing them through season 1 of Stork'd, I was also going through a secret fertility journey. I had explored adoption. It was still on the list. I was still exploring different options and different paths forward. But I also was picking my doctors and getting my levels tested and going through a fertility journey as a solo parent. And I want to offer the word solo parent instead of single parent, because I think it gives us a little bit more texture. I've been using the word solo parent quite a bit, and I've used it in this episode and then also to myself and to family and friends. While that's an entirely true statement, it doesn't reflect the nuances that are actually happening in my life. And that is that knowing that this might be a potential path for me, But before deciding to pull the trigger on this path, I did meet somebody. And that somebody lives in another state and has 2 young children. And so before actually pursuing this path, we had some difficult conversations. And as it turns out, the relationship was so young that it didn't make sense to start trying together. So it created a little bit of a Sophie's choice. And it was one of those choices where you really have to wrestle with, what do I want from life? And there was some frustration and anger and sadness too, somewhat directed at him, but mostly directed at the situation, in that you're really deciding between, am I going to pursue a relationship and a partnership and what I think that this relationship could be, the promise of this relationship, at the exclusion of, or at the possibility that the family piece would never work, that, for timing reasons or for other reasons, it just wouldn't come together? Or do you want to pursue the family building piece and accept the possibility that the relationship might never work? So, by pursuing the family building piece, I basically was saying, you're great, but if I don't have you in my life, that's okay. But if I don't have a child to raise in my life, that's not okay. So I had to decide which of those 2 things, if you could only have one or the other, which of those 2 things is really the right choice for me. And the frustration and anger came because it just isn't fair that some people happen to meet their perfect partner at the right time in their life and they get to do all of the things. And then some of us have to make these really difficult choices, either because fertility journey is not working, or because their partner doesn't want kids, or because they don't want kids, or like me, that the timing just doesn't work out. So in the end, it was actually an easy decision that when I closed my eyes and I imagined a life without children in some capacity, not necessarily biological, but children in some capacity, it was not okay. And so that's how I came to the conclusion. And that is, it's a challenging conversation to have with somebody, but I was more comfortable embracing the possibility that I would be single forever and possibly lonely forever than I was comfortable embracing the possibility that I might never get the experience of parenting. And so that was my truth. It's not everyone's truth for sure, but it's definitely what was true for me. And so I decided to embark on it on my own. It was too important to me to build a family, regardless of what happens with the relationship. And so he was supportive. I think it's a challenging situation, to be sure. And so back to the fertility, you might have heard that I said this was happening around March. I started looking at doctors before March and had picked one, and then COVID hit. And so the fertility clinic shut down. And so I have this path ahead of me, and I've got, a series of next steps and intentions, and difficult conversations have been had, and the wheels are in motion, but there's nowhere to turn for those wheels. There's nowhere to turn to make things happen. Being a type A person that likes to have a plan and a series of action steps that I can take, that was frustrating and infuriating and scary because, how long is this pandemic going to last? How long are fertility clinics going to be closed? What if, I've spent all this time soul searching around who I am and who I want to be and what I want to create, and then it's unavailable to me because of this global crisis that we're all facing? I know a lot of people had the same experience as I did with feeling like your fertility process, your dreams, your hopes, everything is put on hold for an indefinite period of time as a result of fertility clinics being shut down. And that is just such a frustrating experience, having lived through it. And luckily in Massachusetts, they opened up relatively quickly. And also, there are some creative workarounds, one of which is doing an at-home insemination. And we covered that topic in season 1 with a 2-part episode on Mosey Baby. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. So then it's spring, summer, and I'm trying to think about what's next. And I actually switched doctors. I didn't really like the answers I was getting from my primary fertility doctor. I felt like he was talking down to me just a tiny bit, like he was trying to express support and care and concern, but it came across as really condescending. And I also didn't like the pace at which he was willing to move. So I took a month off. I actually had a little freak out. I didn't know if I could do it alone. Things with the relationship were moving forward in a certain way where I was like, oh my God, I just need to stop and put everything on hold. So I took a month off. I think freakouts are completely normal. And I switched doctors. And I have a good friend who is an OBGYN, and she actually would laugh at me and say, "Oh my God, you are a doctor shopper. This is something that the medical community hates. Why don't you trust our opinions?" And I have to say that I strongly believe that doctor shopping is important. We are, as consumers, empowered to pick whomever we think is our best care provider. And we should never feel beholden to somebody, particularly in the medical industrial complex, where we might feel a sense of powerlessness because somebody is an expert in any given field and they might be the ones who we defer to. And I think whenever you feel a discomfort with a doctor, you should definitely switch. And so that's my PSA. I apologize if it's too preachy, but I switched, and it was the best thing I ever did because this doctor that I found was so warm and caring, and he really let me participate in the decision-making process and feel like I had ownership over that process. I then started IUIs, which is intrauterine insemination, at the fertility center because at this point they were back up and running. We did 3 rounds of IUI. The first one was unmedicated. The second one had a little bit of medication. And the third one, made me bananas. There's something about these fertility medications, these hormones, that make you go absolutely crazy. So there was a very dark weekend where I was in bed all weekend crying and couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And it wasn't until, a couple days later that I realized, wait a minute, I'm on a lot of medication, and that could have been it. And it was one of those dark weekends where I thought, oh my gosh, what am I doing with my life? And what am I really here for? And what if this doesn't work out and all that stuff? And it was really pretty terrible. If you're going through that now, either because of medication or just naturally, I'm with you. My heart goes out to you. That is so painful. And then the doctor called and he said, look, I think we gave you too much medication. Your body's responding a little too quickly. I don't think this cycle is going to work. For those of you who know some of the statistics around IUI, which is intrauterine insemination, that is about a 12% likelihood chance for somebody in your late 30s that it's going to work each time. And so I'm not a mathematician, but if you think about the probability of that working over a given period of time, maybe 6 months, it's likely to work, but on any given month, it's not necessarily going to work. But this time, the doctor gave me maybe a 6% chance. He said, it looks like the medication worked a little too quickly and it's probably not going to be your month. It's let's not get our hopes up. Let's be realistic here. And we had a long discussion about whether or not it made sense to pursue that month or to cancel it and wait for the next month. And the reason behind that would have been if you cancel, then you're not putting your body through all that strain. You're not taking on the added cost, some of which was covered by insurance. And you're not getting your hopes up, and you just, you take it easy and you go for the next one. We had a long conversation, and ultimately I decided to move forward with it in part because of insurance. My insurance at the time covers IVF only after you've done 3 IUIs. So for me, it made sense to just do the 3rd IUI, even if it didn't work, and then move on to the heavier guns, so to speak. So I went in not expecting anything, and lo and behold, that was the one that worked. That was the one that took. And I am now very happily pregnant with a sperm donor baby from a 3rd round IUI process that was low likelihood of success. And that's my twist ending so far. I'm currently embarking on the solo parenting process. I am so excited to be at this point in my life and so grateful to have had the medical community on all the incredible research and resources that brings to bear, and that this has been successful. I know it's not successful for everyone, but it was really, really amazing that it worked out for me. I'll tell you something funny, which is that this season took a while to create. It was recorded during a lot of my fertility process. So there are moments when I am hopped up on hormones, and there's moments where I have just gotten terrible news 20 minutes before doing an interview that this didn't take. And there's moments when I'm waiting and waiting and waiting to find out the results. And then there are moments when I have recently found out that I'm pregnant, but I don't know if it's going to stick. And then when I do know it's going to stick, but I don't feel so good. So I listen to the episodes and I can hear in my voice where I am at every place in the journey. I'm curious if you listeners hear it too. There's a couple things I want to share because I just went through the logistics of the story, the technicality of it. But there's a lot of emotions behind all that technicality. And somebody said to me, talk about the fear that you might have had going into going into this process, talk about, the vulnerability that you had. And I actually have to tell you that once I made the decision that I was going to be a solo parent and that I was going to use a sperm donor and I was going to go through a fertility journey, there was no fear. All the fear and anxiety and stress and angst that I felt leading up to that decision went away the second I made the decision, the second I pulled the trigger. The resulting anxiety was more about process. It was, will this work? What do I do? Who's the right doctor? Am I on the right medication? Did I pick the right sperm donor? And that was more logistical uncertainty. But the second I made the decision, there was this deep sense of calm and certainty. And most of the listeners who are hearing this podcast don't know me, but my friends and family might not recognize that emotion from me because I am traditionally somebody who second guesses every major decision and panics over every little tiny thing. And I'm not very certain about the big life choices. And yet this one almost settled in this sense of relief, yeah. And it stayed with me the whole way through. Sure, there are moments when I get a little anxious about solo parenting, the financial commitment, the burden, the loneliness. I imagine that it could be a very lonely experience, and I imagine it can be a very tiring experience, and I'm imagining never sleeping again. But the certainty that this was the right thing for me has never left. So what I take from that, I think, is that sometimes we know on an instinctive level what is best for us, and it's just a matter of not fighting it and turning into that path rather than away from it. That is useful, and for me, that's parenthood. It may not be that for everyone. So yeah, I was encouraged to talk about my fear, and it wasn't fear, it was calmness, which is kind of really cool. There's another thing I want to talk about, and I don't want to just sugarcoat everything and make it all seem lovely and bubbly and happy, but I think I'm at that phase in the pregnancy journey where it is lovely and bubbly and happy, where, the painful can't see your toes thing hasn't happened quite yet. And it's just the happy, eager anticipation. So that's where I am right now. That's my truth. But it's really important to me to share how supported and loved I feel. I have been seeing a therapist as part of this process who specializes in fertility therapy. And she said that there's something unique that happens with solo parents. And that is that when a couple has a baby, everyone assumes that the couple needs time to adjust, and they give some breathing room to that couple so that they can have some space with the baby. But what happens psychologically when a solo parent has a child is that the community shows up and fills in all the gaps and really presents themselves and says, I'm here to be supportive. And I have found that so true from day one, from the minute I told people that I was exploring this, to those people I told when I was successful, to every step of the way through, I felt just so loved and cared about. It's just incredible. And it's amazing to me that there's this huge community of people that are eager to love this child, so that it's not lacking in love because it only has one parent, but it is surrounded by just a tremendous exponential amount of love. And one example of that is that my mom's best friends threw me a baby shower, and they did everything from make little pats of butter that looked like elephants and do the floral arrangements, handmade floral arrangements and handmade pillows and gifts. And that's a community of people that love my mom and who are wonderful, wonderful souls, but they love me too. And that was just really special. So for anyone who's listening who knows a parent or a solo parent who's going through this journey, or someone who's exploring adoption, or any of the number of ways that one might choose to grow a family, I highly encourage you to rush in and show love, because it's really just the most tremendous gift that any human can receive, is feeling like their choice is valid and validated and cared for by, in some cases, strangers or people who don't know me very well. So I'm feeling very well supported. And I'm feeling tremendously lucky. And I also am feeling really grateful to the Stork'd community, because I do know that by pursuing the podcast and by listening to people who are willing to share their stories on record and those who weren't, I know that that process for me is what shored up my decision, that solidified and helped me with my path forward. And so for me, it's like this huge, huge gift. But I'm hearing that it can be very beneficial for others who choose to listen to it or choose to participate in it. And somebody said to me, I listened to your podcast, and the thing I come away with is that everyone deserves a family. And so I think that's going to be our new motto. I'm going to say it again. Everybody deserves a family. However you choose to define it, whether it's a coop full of chickens or a bunch of dogs and kittens or friends that you care deeply for or a partner that you love to the moon and back or biological children or non-biological children or foster children, however you choose to define family, you deserve to have that. And that's really just a wow moment when somebody said that to me. And I want to thank all of our guests for participating. And I really, really hope that when you listen to these episodes, you learn a little something and that you enjoy it. If you do, be so gracious as to share it and like us on Apple or leave a little review or listen on Spotify and leave a little review because that allows more people to access it. And thank you so much for listening to me ramble for a bit. And my favorite poet of all time is Mary Oliver. In fact, I named my dog Oliver Smudge after Mary Oliver, and then a children's book I used to read as a kiddo. And she said, "Someone once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me a while to realize that this too was a gift." That's one of her more famous quotes, or it's a line in one of her more famous poems. And for me, the box of darkness was the disappointment and the fear around things not looking the way it was supposed to look in my life, that I wasn't going to have the marriage and the 2.5 kids and the house in the suburbs and all that beautiful stuff that many people get. And yet, the gift that's come from that is a really desired pregnancy with a child that is already loved by a rich community of people who are wonderful supporters, and a podcast that I get to participate in, and people I get to talk to, and all of you. And so much more has come into my life as a result of what I thought was a very bad place for me. So that's it. I hope you enjoy season 2. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Stork'd with your host, Julia Karol. This podcast is changing the conversation around the ways people define and create family. If you like what you hear, please support us by sharing with friends and following on Instagram at Stork'd_podcast. We also always appreciate it when you rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information, visit storkedpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter. That's STORKD podcast.com.